Hi, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the first half of my conversation with Rebecca Heineman, a game developer in Seattle. We spoke on June 10th, 2015. If you'd like to read a full transcript of this interview, please click the link down below in the description. Also down there you'll see a link to my Patreon, where your support helps me continue with NoDon'tDie.com. Thank you.
All right, let's get started. I'm Rebecca Heineman. I'm the CEO of Old School, a video game company based in Seattle, founded by several really senior developers in the games industry. And I've been developing games for well over 30 years. And I'm responsible for several huge franchises, most notably The Bard's Tale, Dragon Wars, Out of This World. I'm one of the programmers on that. Pretty much, I'm a classic gamer.
I honestly think, like, if you were to pick someone who's been playing video games for about 2 decades or 1 decade, you have probably worked on something that they have played.
Exactly. To put it in perspective, I'm one of the founders of Interplay. When it was Jay, Troy, Brian Fargo, and myself. We founded the company, and I was the one who wrote most of the games for Interplay for our first 5 years of existence. Like, I wrote Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, Task Times in Tone Town, Borrowed Time, did the technology behind Bard's Tale 1 and 2. I wrote Bard's Tale 3. Did ports for all of our games. I did ports under the Interplay banner. I did Racing Destruction Set for the Atari 800. But see, these are all things that I did that generate money so that we wouldn't go out of business and we would be able to start doing things that, later on was like, of course, Battle Chess, which was one of the first games we did that was actually published by Interplay and not by someone else.
So you've done so much. I feel like such a jerk starting off with this question, but, like, why do games get canceled? Like, just... like, why is that a thing that happens?
Well, games get canceled for several reasons. It's never one reason. The most common of them all is bad management. Whoever is running the project is either incompetent or they had their hands tied to the point where they had never had a chance. An example would be an Interplay game we worked on called Wrath of Vulcan Fury, or something like that. It was a Star Trek game that we were doing in the early 90s, and it was ahead of its time in the sense that the game was almost all cinematics. We did 3D models of all the cast members, like Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner, DeForest Kelley, etc. We had them all come in and record their lines. So it literally was a computer-generated episode of the classic series. Mm-hmm. The problem was that because they were using bleeding-edge technology, no one had ever actually sat down to say, how much would it cost per minute to generate this footage? No one had ever done that.
This is kind of like the same sort of problems people run into on Kickstarter.
Exactly. So, as a result, they said, hey, we did a little demo. They made a model of Spock in 3D. They rendered it, and they did some, human facial motion, and they said, this is great. And they greenlit the project without anybody ever actually saying, well, we did this demo by using 50 computers in an array in the back room, and it took it an hour to render 2 seconds of scenery. Remember, this is back in 1990, which is a significant amount of CPU time just to do the simplest of renderings. Mm-hmm. And nobody ever said, well, let's see, the game's going to use approximately 2 hours of footage. So if it takes us about an hour to generate a second of footage with 50 computers, multiply that out, that's a lot of money and CPUs in order to render 2 hours of footage. That's assuming it was gotten right the first time.
Now, Well, I mean, I'm a writer, but I'm not a person who's ever made a game. But isn't there like a lot of math involved with making games, or is that a really stupid thing for me to say?
It is if you're an engineer, if you're doing the engine of the game. Like my job, I do a lot of math. On 3D math. In fact, there are several algorithms. I'm the one who invented them. The problem, though, is that for a majority of people who create a game, you don't have to know one line of math. Like in the example of Wrath of Vulcan Fury, the writing was done by D.C. Fontana. She was one of the writers of the original series, and all she did was to give us a movie script. You know, it was just like saying, hey, write me a script suitable for a TV series. The only difference, though, is that after each scene, if there's a decision tree, write each individual scene. So, like, what if you go up to Spock and you don't have this? Spock's going to say this. Write those lines. Right. If you do have it, then what does Spock do? And that's essentially how it's written. But it's still just writing, no math.
Is it just really difficult to predict what costs of a game might be because it just may not work as predicted, and then it takes time to figure out how to pivot, or like how did the costs just end up creeping so much?
Costs creep because very few people actually sit down and pre-plan it all. A good example is like when you do a major motion picture. People have done motion pictures so many times now, it's a science. It's an exact science. You get the script, you lay out the storyboards, you figure out each scene, and then you even figure out a budget saying this scene will just set up in this one set, these 12 scenes in this one set, that set costs us this much money. These scenes, they need CG, this is how much we think it's going to cost. And then you send it off to bids for CG. I mean, but as you create the film, before even the camera rolls, you already know every single shot from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, how it's pacing, how you feel it's going to be the length. You now have a good idea, a really good idea what the budget's going to be like. And then therefore when you start filming, then of course, you know, there's always the shit happens. Somebody hurts themselves, or there's an accident, or the way you thought the scene was going to be shot wasn't going to happen, or the cost overrun. That happens. Unfortunately, because computer games are more like the films of the 1920s, 1910, no one knew that shit. They just said, hey, I want to do a story, and they just start filming each scene, and it's the director's responsibility to edit all in their head. And there's no thought about costs. They just say, hey, let's just keep filming until we run out of film and then edit what we got, and that's what we ship.
So when a game gets canceled, does that sort of wisdom in hindsight, is it gained in any way? Is it shared between the industry, or is it just sort of... Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. See, that's what I just explained was bad management, and that's one reason a game gets canceled. Another reason is the game is finished or nearly finished. They take the game and they actually tell people, let's play it. And if all the reviewers universally say this game sucks, they may just cancel it right there because they say, hey, it's going to suck. Other reasons are... maybe the company spent all the money developing the game. Now they don't have any money for the advertising budget. Maybe they don't have money to ship it because, for one, is in the past, when you finish a game, you still have to press the CDs. You still have to ship it to the stores. That ties up $1 million or more. And if you don't even have that money in the bank, you usually just go bankrupt, or you sell the game to somebody else to publish. Yeah, like a different publisher. Yeah.
But of course, you know, if your game sucks, or it's a game that you just can't get anybody interested in, then at that point, you know, your game's going to die anyways. That's another way the game can get canceled, is that the game just... you don't have enough money. You know, you may have the money to finish the game, but you don't have the money to get it in the stores, or now today... is where it really doesn't cost that much money to get it up on Steam or Golo Games or something like that. It does cost money to advertise.
Right, and I mean, that's at least from what I've read, that's where a lot of the budget is these days, or at least like there will be an equal amount set aside as the development budget.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I never know for sure when I'm talking about these numbers because, like, there was that thing with Destiny where, it got reported it was like, oh, it was 500 million, and then I think later they're like, no, it was just 120 million. But that's still a lot of money, and I'm sure the marketing, based on what I've seen, is at least a 1-to-1, if not more.
It can be. In many cases, I've noticed that companies would, whatever the budget for the game was, they would usually spend that much money to develop the game just for marketing.
Yeah.
Now, if it's an indie title, we don't do that much marketing. We just do trade shows and stuff like that. But if it's like Call of Duty, where you have TV commercials and so forth, yeah, you're talking a multi-million-dollar ad campaign.
So this is the thing I'm trying to get a sense of, and obviously you can't speak, universally, although you have had a lot of experience. Is how valued is project management at game companies when it comes to stuff like this?
It's totally a mixed bag. Some companies, it's gospel. Project management is important, and of course, those are the companies in which they tend to get their games out on time, on budget.
Right.
Sometimes the games may not be as good as you think that they should be, only because the company realizes, hey, we only have X number of dollars. We've got to cut corners. But then other companies just simply don't do that pre-production I was talking about, and then they wonder, hey, we ran out of money. What are we going to do? You're in big trouble.
Sorry, it's not funny. It's horrible, but
it is horrible, but unfortunately, it is a truism. Perfect example in the industry was Double Fine's Adventure, which eventually ended up becoming Broken Age. That is a classic tale, in my opinion, of bad management, because what had happened was that they made a promise to their Kickstarter backers that for $400,000 they're going to make a game. Fine and dandy. And, of course, they were really thinking in their minds they're just going to do a game no more graphical better than something like the classic Day of the Tentacle or Monkey Island, which for $400,000, it's quite reasonable to do the game of that quality. But then, Kickstarter just drove a bulldozer with money and dropped it off of their front door, and are like, what are we going to do with all this money? Let's make a bigger game. But for whatever reason, when they came up with the idea of the bigger game, somewhere along the line, the message was lost that, if someone gives you $3 million, you just don't make a $7 million game out of it.
Yeah, I'm not great at math, but those numbers don't seem to add up.
No, they don't. And so they then ended up having to split the game into two parts for Broken Age and Broken Age Part 2, but the damage was done in the sense that now Double Fine has this now stigma about them that they promised A but delivered B, and because they were given quadruple the budget they asked for, actually it was more than that. They asked for $400,000, they ended up with like almost $3 million, so they got like how much is that? That comes around 8 times the budget, and they still couldn't deliver the game on budget.
Yeah, they just got too ambitious.
Yeah, that right there is bad project management.
So, I don't know. I know you've had, maybe I'm misremembering, but you've had some overlap with, like, Hollywood, right?
Oh,
like,
unfortunately, yes.
Okay, good. So, I'm sorry. But I'm curious, does project management seem to be better in Hollywood compared to video games?
No. Nope. Is
it equal?
It's about equal. It's, again, mixed bag. Some production companies are right on the money. Other production companies are like, they think that the bank account is completely, endless, and they spend money like crazy. And then when their producers say, hey, got to cut the budget, they say, well, then we can't finish the film. And it's like, what?
So, I mean, like, I don't know. What are the requirements for someone to lead on a video game at like a bigger studio?
Well, unfortunately, there's 3 different criteria. Only one is required. Criteria number 1, which is a cynical one. You happen to know the boss. either know the boss or you got promoted from the ranks or somehow you ended up in a position where because someone knows you personally, you get in there. Unfortunately, more often than not, those type of producers tend to be ineffective. Occasionally they're ones who are like they're respectable people. Others are like, how did you get this job? Others are that they proved their competency because they had shipped, games in the past either through indie studios. Examples would be like Warren Spector or Richard Garriott, in which their names are attached, or hell, Will Wright. I mean, their names are attached to multi-million-dollar franchises, and their games have made so much money that they are effective managers. Now, granted, there are people out there who have made multi-million-dollar franchises, but at the same time have no concept of how to manage their project budgets.
Right.
But even so, however they do it, even if they go way over budget, they still make money. So, they're the James Cameron, shall we say, of the video game world. And then lastly is someone who is competent and rose up through the ranks through their competency. Sadly, that kind of person is rare. They do exist. I know several people who they started off in QA and just through sweat, blood, and tears have proven their competency and have gone on to become extremely successful project managers and producers.
Yeah, I mean, you hear about stuff like that all the time, starting out at the mailroom at whatever movie studio or TV studio.
Yeah.
Do you get the sense that seems to be happening less in video games?
Yes, I do feel that it's less because very few companies are actually hiring people from, shall we say, QA. Personal experience. Interplay was both notorious and virtuous in the sense that we were bloody cheap, so we would hire people from QA to do other jobs. Like, we need an artist. The first thing we do is you go to QA and say, hey, anybody here want to help us out with art? And some of them would audition by doing some of that work on company time. And then the ones that we find actually show promise, we put them on doing art. Unfortunately, one of the side effects is that we were still paying a minimum wage.
I assumed. And some might call that good management, though.
There is that. There's some calls for good management. However, though, there are several excellent game designers, producers, and programmers who are now in the industry who all came from the equivalent of the Interplay mailroom. And granted, there are people who were promoted from the mailroom that really should never have left the mailroom, or in our case, QA. But it's, but the thing is, you gave these people a chance. You actually gave them the fact that they could come in, make flipping burgers wages just playing video games, but those who have ambition and actually wanted to move forward were given shots at being a producer or being a project manager or being a programmer or an artist or an audio. And those who actually proved that they could do it, well, then their jobs were changed and they sometimes got a bump in pay and off they went. And then eventually they, developed whole careers out of it.
Why do you think video games are so fixated on Hollywood? Like, you hear the phrase, video games are bigger than Hollywood, and I think it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. But what's your view of that overlap and that fixation?
Well, the phrase video games is bigger than Hollywood is true, yet it's not true.
I know.
It's true in the sense that all the money that was generated by the film industry versus the money generated by the video game industry, video games make more money. However, they're bundling in the sales of the Xbox One, the PS3, PS4, etc., which is kind of skewing the numbers.
Yeah, because Hollywood doesn't include cameras.
Yeah, they don't sell cameras. They don't sell lighting equipment, so forth. So, and definitely you don't go buying your own home theater. You go to a theater, you give them, $12 or something like that. You watch the film and you walk home, but you don't keep the theater.
But why? I mean, why is that such a bragging point? Why? I mean,
because there are video games that are making money in fact, in some cases, more money than Hollywood blockbusters. A good example is like both Destiny and the Call of Duty franchises. They've generated over $1 billion, in some cases, per game when they make a release. There's only a handful of films that have grossed that kind of money.
Yeah, but like I never hear like such and such, musician is bigger than such and such movie star. Like I don't know. It's not a big deal.
Well,
I'm just sort of curious like where that comes from.
There's a big difference in what you just said. Musician
Right.
and movie star is that you're selling the person. In the film and games, you're selling the product.
Right.
Because there is a comparison. Films, whenever a film comes out, the first thing they do is they announce the grosses. And it's a contest saying Tomorrowland got $9 million. I mean, I'm making the numbers up. I don't know.
No, I know, but it's reported on like it's news.
Yeah. Well, the thing though is that games are rated the same way. When a video game comes out, there's a thing called PC data, which tracks all the sales numbers, and there's even a website which tracks Steam. Does a good estimate of Steam sales. And when you look at the selling price of a game and how many copies, you can get a rough idea of what their grosses are. And video game companies are constantly looking at the grosses. In fact, in many cases, when a game is shipped, you are rated on two things and two things only. Your Metacritic rating, which is essentially the reviews, and your grosses. And a majority of time, your sequel is greenlit solely on the grosses.
Do you think that this is harming the industry in some way?
Yes. Oh, it's totally harming the industry. The problem is that one of the things Interplay did was that because we had so much money from some of our earlier titles, we were not afraid to experiment. And granted, we did make some games you're going like, what were you thinking? But other games were ones where they were just diamonds in the rough and they became franchises on their own. A good example is like Interplay did a bunch of later on, after we did the Barstow series and Wasteland, we started doing other games like Planescape Torment, and we did a bunch of D&D games and so forth, but most other publishers wouldn't even touch that. And it made Interplay well known for that type of game. But then we did a bunch of experimental games. However, right now, today, everybody is so risk averse that if I go in there with an original concept and say, hey, here's a brand new game, it's never been done before, and I really think it's going to sell 1 million copies, like, I don't know, Minecraft. Every publisher out there is going to tell you, no, but if you come in here with Harry Potter 7 or Call of Duty 9, sign you up right now. Because the idea is, if the Call of Duty or Harry Potter or whatever game that's already been done has grosses on it, they will rate you based on those grosses. And if they Call of Duty grossed $1 billion, so if we add some more stuff to it and put in movie stars and put some more money in the budget, we should gross $1.2 million next time. Let's greenlight that. Instead of, hey, let's pay this little tiny company in Sweden, I don't know, a couple $100,000 and make us a little puzzle game for kids and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, too, because I think of it as like a sort of lateral shift in thinking from ports, which used to be a bigger deal as the different hardware was, more different.
Well, actually, it came back. That's back again. In fact, we're doing a hell of a lot of business right now doing ports.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. So then, how would you distinguish that? Because I guess I feel like nowadays ports are much more 1-to-1, whereas I think before, like I can remember many more examples of games being adapted or changed for the platform, like instances where one title would come out on Nintendo or Super Nintendo and it would be this way, and on Sega it would be almost a completely different game. Like, am I completely fabricating that memory, or do you remember that too?
Actually, you are correct, and that is something I wanted to bring up, is that today we have a huge number of consoles. Xbox 360, Xbox One, PS3, PS4, the Vita, Android platforms, iOS. Now,
Yeah.
there are differences in the point that some versions are ports, that they actually are totally different, but other ones are, it's the same game. Examples like, there's so little difference between the PS4 and the Xbox One is that they pretty much are the same game.
Exactly.
The only difference is artificial differences, like we add a level or two, or some sort of exclusive content, only because Sony, Microsoft, or whatever either sells it, pays us money to do it, or it's their sneaky way of getting you to buy the game twice.
Exactly.
But right now, the only real platform that's actually any real different is the Nintendo DS. Like, if you do anything on the DS, you're pretty much writing the game from scratch. But if you are doing it on the Wii, it means you have to do a lot more effort into engineering, but you're still doing the same game.
Oh, do you mean the 3DS?
Yes, the 3DS, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no problem. No, I was going to correct that in the transcript, but I wasn't sure if you meant DS.
No, sorry, I was meaning the 3DS.
No worries.
But the whole thing, though, is that you've got this whole slew of people wanting their game on all these platforms because not everybody is doing let's see.
Well, I mean, I think there's just sort of been an erosion of the memory or the tradition of bigger companies being more strategic and selective about where they made their alliances. Excuse me. I think, I guess Square, Square is an example of I don't know if they're doing stuff for Nintendo now, but they used to only do stuff for Nintendo, and then they decided to go to PlayStation.
Okay. David, can you do me a favor? I call you back in about 10 minutes? I just had somebody come up with a thing I got to deal with right this second.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, I'll call you in just 10 minutes.
Okay, sure thing.